Theory of Knowledge presentation by Sam Rose and Sammy Sahyouni. Our real life situation is going to be when a couple years ago, me and Sammy were on the same soccer team together. There's one player, who we'll just call Player 1, who was really naturally talented and was kind of known as the best player on the team. The other player, who we'll just call Player 2, wasn't as naturally talented, but he was a really hard worker, and everyone respected him for that. The thing was that Player 1 didn't show up to all the practices, and he missed a lot of the stuff we were working on, like plays and tactics and other strategies. Player 2, however, he made an effort to show up to all these practices, and he learned and memorized all these by heart. Despite this, the coach still played Player 1 more than Player 2.
So, now we're going to define each player. Let's define Player 1 as an intuitive player, and Player 2 as a reasonable player. We're saying that Player 1 is intuitive because he basically has a natural understanding of the game, and he basically knows exactly where to be on the field without necessarily thinking about it, but rather following his own instinct. We're saying that Player 2 uses reason to play because he applies all of the tactics and strategies that he learned during the practice to his playing, and he knows basically where to be on the field for all of the plays because he remembered them, not because he naturally knows it. And he's actively thinking about it during the game. Ethically, the coach has to make a decision as to who he will play during the game, and in making that decision, he chooses the intuitive player over the reasonable player, making Player 2's reason seem like a more limited way of approaching the game than Player 1.
So, by broadening this topic, we came up with the knowledge question: is reason a more limited way of knowing than intuition? And when applying this to ethics specifically, the question comes up: is it ethical to value a person's intuition over another person's reason?
The coach's position in this situation is to basically make a decision on what player he deems more important. That is both ethical and beneficial to the team. The coach doesn't necessarily want to encourage Player 1's behavior because he doesn't show up to any practices and does not really put in any effort if he does. But Player 1 is also seen as a better player than Player 2. The coach decided that it is overall more important to the team to play Player 1, since his intuitive style and sense of the game seems to be more natural and helpful. Now, in making this knowledge question, we are assuming that the coach did, in fact, find Player 2's reasonable playing more limited, when it is extremely possible that Player 1 could have just had a more specific skill set for what the coach wanted at that moment and specific needs.
So despite this, we are still making the claim that reason is a more limited way of knowing than intuition. And in the case of ethics, that it is more ethical to value a person's intuition over another person's reason. Counterclaim to this, however, is that intuition is more limited because of a natural instinct, and it cannot grow and be learned like reason.
So, in our real-life situation for soccer, the claim that reason is a more limited way of knowing than intuition is supported by a few facts. First of all, Player 1's intuitive way of playing and making decisions is much quicker than Player 2, since it doesn't necessarily require much thinking beforehand, and is more of an instinctual reaction. These few milliseconds can be vital in a game, and without hesitation, Player 1 was often able to make extremely quick decisions that ultimately led to big plays in the game. However, Player 2's reasonable way of playing takes away those few milliseconds and forces him to think about every action he is making. Because he thinks about the actions, it adds on some time, and that time that's added on could result in a loss of the game. This can often be distracting, since so much is going on in the game that he needs to think about it. Sometimes he would lose the ball during the game because he hesitated deciding what to do with it.
So a counterclaim to this would be that intuition is limited because it cannot be expanded upon like reason is, And that's supported by the fact that player 2's ability to learn in the game and apply reason to every situation allows him to make the best choice, pass, or even shot, while player 1's intuition often worked, but it wasn't always the best option that he had. He was just following his first instinct, and without seeing the bigger picture like player 2, some very good plays were missed out on.
So, although player 1 and player 2 had completely different ways of approaching the game, they both ultimately had the same goal of helping the team and ultimately winning the game for them. Because of this, it is extremely difficult to determine which player contributed to this goal more, since each one contributed differently. Player 1 may have scored a goal or created a good opportunity by making quick decisions, but player 2 often helped create that situation and get the ball up by the field by making good decisions with the ball that he learned during practice. In this situation, the coach's decision seems to be purely a personal and biased choice, since both players contribute vital aspects to the game.
So another area of knowledge that our knowledge question can be applied to is the human sciences. However, in doing this, it brings up a new knowledge question. How does intuition change between the areas of knowledge? In the case of human sciences, we'll define intuition as an instinctual understanding of something, when in ethics it was defined more as a natural reflex or reaction to something. So our claim is that intuition is a more limited way of knowing because reason allows for more learning than intuition does. For example, with the human sciences, a mother has to teach his child not to walk on the street, because to a child, the street looks like any other ground, any other floor that it can walk on. The mother knows that there are cars in the street, though, and that those are seriously dangerous, especially to a child. So by teaching the child this, the kid learns to reason that the streets are dangerous because there are cars in it, and he can further apply this to other situations that involve cars, since he can now make a reasonable decision to avoid them. So our thinking is valuable because it can be applied to more situations like this, and can be expanded upon. For example, if he knows that streets are dangerous because of cars, he can also reason that other things in the streets, like motorcycles and bikes, are also dangerous, and that in the future he should avoid them.
So, a counterclaim that reason is more limited than intuition basically suggests that knowing something through logic and reason is more limited than understanding something naturally. An example to this claim would be a baby crying because it hears a loud noise. The baby was not told to cry whenever a loud noise occurs, and they have not learned to do so through experience, but rather it is a natural response to the event that occurs, because the child intuitively understands that a loud noise could mean danger and could potentially harm them, even though in today's world that might be less of the case. This intuition is extremely important because, similar to soccer, no thought has to go into the reaction. Since it's a natural reaction, a decision does not necessarily have to be made, and for a baby, this response can tell its mother that it could be in danger.
So in this case of the human sciences, it seems that intuition towards avoiding danger is important at a young age. But as a child starts to grow up, reason becomes more and more valuable since the world becomes a more complex and dangerous place. Reason allows for the child to adapt to this world and applies past experiences and lessons to new situations and dangers.
So, another area of knowledge in which the knowledge question is reason a more limited way of knowing than intuition applies to is art. An example that supports this claim that reason is in fact more limited is a personal example from my 8th grade art class. In the class, I learned how to hold a pencil, how to shade, how to contrast colors, how to form objects, and other techniques that made the art more lifelike. This, along with learning some of art theory, allowed me to draw a portrait and submit it to the end of the year art competition. My friend, however, also submitted a piece, but he had never taken an art class before, and he ended up winning.
In this situation, Sammy used reason to apply all the techniques he had learned in a logical way that represented the picture that he wanted to create. His friend, however, used his intuition to translate the picture in his head to drawing on paper. Sammy used reason to apply shading to his picture because he knew that it made it look more realistic. That's something that he learned in class. But his friend just intuitively used shading because he saw how shadows and light affected the objects around him, and he just thought that's how you made pictures more realistic. So, since Sammy's friend ended up winning, it's apparent that the skills that Sammy had learned weren't as effective as his friend's natural understanding of how to draw, making it seem like reason was actually more limited than intuition. It is very possible, however, that Sammy's friend was just a better drawer than him, and that in any case of the situation, his friend would have won the contest because Sammy was just simply less talented than he was.
So, a counterclaim is that with music, like composing on piano, intuition is more limited than reason because a person cannot intuitively play the piano without first knowing something about music theory or the structure of notes. It is not possible that a child that has never seen a piano before go up to it and just start playing it purely off an intuitive sense of how each key would sound and how the combination of the keys would sound good, because the notes do not have a natural configuration of what would sound good. Even playing random notes and finding out which sound good together is using reason to construct past experiences into new knowledge that allows you to play better. The only case this would fall under is that if a child used reason to first learn music theory and then used intuition to create their own piece. Although intuition may help in this process with a general understanding of music or a talent for matching different tones, reason is much more valuable in constructing and composing because reason is the only possible way of knowing when constructing a piece of music.
So after exploring our claim that reason is more limited than intuition, through the areas of knowledge of ethics, human sciences, and art, we find that oftentimes it is difficult to say whether one way of knowing is conclusively better than another. For example, in the human sciences, we found that the claim was true since reason allowed for growth and learning. But that was only relevant to danger. Another example in the human sciences could give an opposite result. Within ethics, we found that a synthesis of the claim and the counterclaim was the best option. Specifically with sports, finding that the coach made the choice based on a personal decision of what he wanted for the game, but that the best player would be someone who combined both intuition and reason into the game to make both quick and strong decisions. This was also the case with the arts, where we found that although the intuitive drawing won in our example, the best case would be someone who draws with both reason and intuition.
So, with the question of whether or not reason is a more limited way of knowing than intuition, we find that although this statement may be true in isolated cases, a blanket statement cannot be made about one being more limited than the other, since they are both extremely vital to applying knowledge in real life. And because of this factor, we found that, generally, the best way to apply knowledge in one's life is to use both intuition and reason equally, so that a quick, natural, and logical decision can be made that is based off past experiences and knowledge. A possible flaw with this conclusion is that both options are not always the best choice, since some situations require either quick, intuitive decisions or well thought out reasonable decisions. An example of a decision that requires intuition is that if someone is driving and the car in front of them suddenly brakes, intuition would set in when they have to quickly swerve to the lane next to them. Whether if they used reason to make the decision, they would have thought for too long and would have ended up ultimately hitting the car in front of them.
From the perspective from a past time, like the Enlightenment era, specifically from the point of view of an intellectual or philosopher, our conclusion would be denied, because during this time, reason was championed as the best method of explaining the world. Intuition was often seen as flawed, and would be valued much less than it is nowadays. This is because intuition was seen as a human reflex, and since humans were inherently flawed, so is this reflex. Reason was the guiding light by which all decisions should be made, so from this perspective, the conclusion would have been that intuition is a more limited way of knowing than reason.
So, to link back to our real-life situations, In our first real-life situation, we had an intuitive player and a reasonable player. Although the intuitive player was seen as more skilled and got much more playing time, the reasonable player was also important in the movement and progression of the game. With our conclusion in mind, however, the best player in this situation would be one who uses both intuition and reason during his playing. If all of the plays and tactics were learned, then reason could be used to make a plan of action before getting the ball, and then intuition could be used to find the quickest and most effective way to follow that plan in the moment. This removes the fault with reason, which was hesitation, and also with intuition, which was not making the best choice possible. In the other area of human sciences, reason was used primarily to learn from past experiences and used logic to apply it to new situations. Intuition was used in the form of having a natural reaction or understanding of a situation and being able to respond to it quickly. In this area of knowledge, our conclusion that a unity of reason and intuition would be beneficial is also true. With our example of learning danger, having intuition helps in that it allows the child to have a feeling of what is dangerous. But along with learning from reason, this intuition can grow to include things that they have learned were dangerous, making their reaction time to dangerous situations much quicker.
In the area of knowledge of the arts, reason is used to apply learned techniques and theory in order to make a piece more realistic. Intuition is found in the form of natural skill in understanding how to get an image from one's head or from real life onto a piece of paper. Similar to the soccer example, the ideal situation for the arts in this case would be someone who is able to use skills and techniques that they have learned in a class and apply them in an intuitive way to make a picture that is both technically and artistically strong. The artist would first be able to understand the techniques learned in the art classes, and then combine it with their own imaginative vision, but then configure their vision into a more elaborate piece because they are implementing a natural drawing method along with techniques that they learned in their art class. Through the combination of both of these methods and knowledge, they'll be able to create an extremely natural yet sophisticated piece of art. So overall, the answer that we found to our knowledge question, is reason a more limited way of knowing than intuition, was a synthesis of both of these ways of knowing, which is ideal for applying knowledge, experience, and your natural instinct to your daily life.